what our plan is for today is we're going to go through our table of contents, which is to update our digital landscape. What are the goals of a security compliance and regulation system, and overall IT program basics?
Welcome everyone. My name is Sarah Lynn, and as Shannon says, I'm here in the BPM Fairfield office. This is not a virtual background. I am really in the office, so everyone welcome. Today, Mike and I are going to really talk about updating the digital landscape as it pertains to nonprofits. And you might say, well, how is that different from every other organization? And we want to narrow that down for you a little bit more specifically. So 5 big topics that we like to talk about. First and foremost, ensuring that all the stakeholders in your nonprofit organization understand and update and the transformation conversation. It is a buzzword that's been around for several years: digital transformation, business transformation, IT transformation. But what can it do for us today, and how can it support the nonprofit organizations? We want to discuss a little bit about modern techniques in scanning and what that has to do with exploits and vulnerabilities and patching and tracking to remediation. We want to help you understand where it's important to review or assess your technology, facts, and other things all the time. This is not a one and done situation. It's not something that we should be doing every 3 years or 5 years. It's something that should be done very frequently, monthly, quarterly, etc. And then discuss how documentation and resources can support all of our efforts in transformation, whether that's tech or processes. And then finally, what do we do to roadmap our future? If we want to budget for things in the area of transformation, how do we roadmap that? How do we get the influx of implementations to align with compliance and regulations that you have to deal with? So this is where we'll start the conversation. So what is it about the process of IT to security that allows us to help support the nonprofits and other businesses in repeat success? And what has us be able to support them in transformation? So if you start with your basic IT resources, are usually going to be 2 things: people and tools. So we have tools that need to be implemented or are implemented, tools that need transformation. We have legacy tools that need to be brought into an IT program of sorts so that we can provide or build that IT security program that includes all the technology, all the applications, and all the access controls and security controls that are really needed in your business. But we want to be able to transform those into modern day solutions. So then you get into the implementation portion, and Mike's team steps in and helps us support after we've looked at your tools, looked at your resources, helped you assess if you have a program, how to build that program, and how to transform that technology into modern day technology. Mike, did you want to speak a little bit about that space between looking at the program and building that transformational program?
So Sarah, what my favorite thing to do in nonprofit or any business is when talking about this space is really encourage my customers to create an IT steering committee. The thing that I see in my customers is that sometimes there's a disconnect between, IT as a department or the security component and the rest of the departments in nonprofit or just, for-profit organizations. And so by having an organization creating an IT, steering committee can really bring all of those stakeholders to help the organization go through that digital transformation. because we want to hear from the program managers. What are they looking for? What are their pain points? In technology, and maybe it's not even in technology. Maybe it's in, you know, um, customer intakes or program, management. And so getting all of those voices throughout the organization to come together to move the organization technology forward is one of the things that I always recommend.
Absolutely. I like the committee because it really touches on a topic that is supportive of transformation, and that is tone at the top. And that means those stakeholders that are running the organization or supporting financially or with resources the organization, that they get it. They get how to move the organization forward with technology and security. So I really like the idea of the committee. One of the other components that's in the life cycle of implement, build, get new tools, modernize is testing and retesting and pen testing. So many organizations, small to medium, and I'm sure nonprofits as well, have never done any testing from the outside in or the inside in. So there is a concept that everything is secure because we built it, or everything is as secure as we can afford. But there's no testing to see if that in fact is truth. And it is always important to do that testing on some frequency, whether that's an annual basis or an inside test once a year and an outside test once a year, so that you can get to the root of vulnerabilities and exploits that actually exist. A lot of people will not have this particular component in their life cycle because they think it costs a lot of money. And there are modern testing solutions that are built for the small to medium business. So we can talk to you about those as well. What I'm saying is don't be afraid of talking about these solutions because you might think they cost a lot of money, when in fact the modern day solutions are built around return on your investment and cost savings for you.
And Sarah, to add on to this, I mean, you and I think have with customers are starting to see that questionnaires are starting to come up on funding sources of, is this, testing rigor happening in IT?
Yeah.
And you can either solve these by tools, as Sarah said, but these testing of processes can be done manually on a quarterly basis. And a good example is, security reviews. Are, there's a group that has, let's call it maybe HR or accounting or different, program security groups, and doing a regular review quarterly to make sure that those individuals that are part of that department is a manual testing process that doesn't require tools, doesn't require expensive processes, but just something that can be done. And it's very effective. And we're starting to see those questions coming up in cybersecurity, questionnaires and audits done by funding sources. So, a simple change of process with someone like Sarah, who will write those policies and procedures, and then my team or your IT team will follow those policies and procedures to have those executed on a regular basis.
Absolutely. And that's a good point, Mike, because if we back it up to that IT security program, everything doesn't have to be a technology, or everything doesn't have to interconnect with a piece of technology. It might actually be a manual process that's in place because of your size or budget, but manual processes that are actually functioning with some type of rigor. actually can be as important or as good as some piece of technology. So don't shy away from something that you might want or need in your program, or your clients or agencies or customers might be asking for. Uh, just because you think it might be attached to a dollar sign, it might not be. When we talk about testing, some people don't know what testing is because they've never done any testing in their environment. Some people think about testing as penetration testing from the outside in. Can I hack in? Can someone hack in from the internet? But there's all sorts of testing, and some apply to you and some do not. So in the external testing, there's the old-fashioned social engineering. Can I walk up to the front desk of your building and ask to see the president or ask to see an important person, and I get walked in and there's no discernment of whether I should come into the building? Or if someone drops off a package and that's not FedEx or UPS, is there any discernment that that package should be dropped off? Or is it just delivered to someone else? And then there's all sorts of mechanisms that people could use to get with social engineering to somewhere in your building or somewhere in your offices that they should not be. So that's a very manual external test. There are other external tests on your email services to make sure that people cannot break into your email, your web services to make sure there aren't uncredentialed things there that people can break into, your network, either that network that supports your office, your data center, or even expands out to your home devices or home networks, and then the Wi-Fi connections in your building and how they expand as well. All of that is external security testing, what I like to call from the outside in. And then there's the internal testing, what I like to call from the inside in. Let me see if I can break into this network from that network. We separated them for a reason. We don't want to cross the bridge. So you may have a flat network at your office or your data center. You probably, like I have, 3 separate networks here in this office. I don't want to be able to bridge the gap between those networks because that defeats the purpose of having separate networks. Make sure we all understand the boundaries, the segmentation of the networks or the systems, or where the users and the administrators are segmented. Make sure that we understand what is a workstation, what is a server. I don't know if many of you remember many years ago with Windows 3.11, Windows for work groups, where your machine might also be the server for Mike to log into. Well, we want to make sure that we segregate those, and we don't have that happening unless we want to have that happen. And if we do, what do we put around it to ensure that it's secure? And then there internally, there are miscellaneous systems. And those systems could be systems that someone brought in from home, systems that someone has legacy sitting on the network, systems that people bring in of their own tablets and cell phones and they sit them on the network. If there's not the proper boundary there, there could be a breach of the internal network by these devices. And then, of course, egress controls, which is when you want to go from the inside out, making sure that that data that you are securely storing inside, whether that's a data center or an office or a machine, that you do not want to go outside, like a donor database, perchance, that it cannot get to the outside unless it is managed, controlled, and understood. Alerted, notified, someone just took my entire database and sent it somewhere else. And then we look at the applications, quite often left out. Are the applications you're using secure? quite often people buy the least expensive software package or startup package or cloud package. And Mike and I are used to walking you through whether the one you have is secure enough, or if it needs an upgrade, or if it needs a wrapper. But there are applications, web, mobile, and thick clients that all have to be reviewed for security. They may not be as secure as you think, default right out of the box. And Mike will talk a bit more about that. And then the last section that I talk about is a little more sophistication. When we come to testing, it's targeted testing, having things like red teams that are always testing. They're testing all of these components all the time. That is something that might be in your maturity model when you grow, or when you can afford people to be able to test at all times, or it could be a software that runs at all times, like a SIM that does some component of testing. And a SIM is a security information event management system. There are other points of testing that we get very targeted on: vulnerability scanning and password audits. But Mike, I'm sure you wanted to speak a little bit about those internal and external and application tests.
Well, Sarah, I'm going to propose a question. I'm 100% SaaS. I'm all in the cloud, Sarah. Why do I need to worry about this stuff?
No, absolutely. So this is a myth. There is a myth that you put everything in the cloud and the cloud just magically secures it, whether that's Amazon or Azure or someone else's cloud or hybrid cloud. In fact, 1/3 to 2/3 of the controls that control security are still on our side of the fence. They're just making it easy in the cloud and covering the basics. So we really want to make sure that we have assessed the cloud that we're either going to move to, or that we've already moved to make sure that we're doing our part.
I love that. I love that answer, Sarah. So what I want to really add to this security testing is there's very specialized people, and BPM has a team of penetration testing individuals, and the service is not as used as much as I wish it was by nonprofit and for-profit companies. A lot of companies that are like, oh, we have to have pen testing done. But this, as IT specialists, we get kind of siloed sometimes, and you get the blinders on, and we have our systems where like it's we got 12 character passwords, we have multi-factor authentication turned on. We've done all the security things that we're supposed to do, but getting an outside team that specializes in understanding what are the current exploits and testing those against your organization is extremely valuable. Now, it's being on this side of the fence of having systems tested. You have to have a group of individuals that are saying, you know what, they're going to help me show me where my vulnerabilities are. It's okay. I can't possibly know every single exploit out there, but they do, because this is what they're specialty at. And they're going to give me a laundry list of things to help my organization become more secure. And that's what I really love about using companies and groups of doing penetration testing to help me and my organization become better at security. And what might not necessarily be a hole today, in 6 months could be a hole. And so it's something that you're like, oh, we had a pen test done a couple of years ago, we're fine. And no, it's an iterative process. Sarah, do you want to add anything more to that?
I do. I want to talk just a teeny bit about the remote worker, because there is another myth that the remote worker cannot be tested, that the remote worker is sitting on their home network and they can't, we can't really see them. We can't really see what they're doing. And that just means it hasn't been baked in yet. In fact, I have remote workers and I can see what they do when they log in, what it is they're doing. And if I cared about it to the keystroke, I could go to the keystroke to see what they do keystroke by keystroke. I really have defined what I care about that the remote worker is doing so that I know they're doing it securely. They're coming in over VPN or they're going to a cloud using MFA, and I'm logging what their actions are. So there's a lot of testing and logging and monitoring we can do even for that remote worker. The main goal is that you have control or governance over your own IT in the most efficient manner. It might start with the most basic things like understanding every technical asset, including clouds and infrastructure that you have, every VPC, every application, every cloud application, every asset you have, understanding what can be automated and modernized and what cannot be automated. As Mike spoke of, there may be things that either cannot be automated or it's just not a good idea and you want to roadmap automation. Understanding vulnerabilities and patch management. As we had in one of the polling questions, is it okay to leave those systems alone just because we don't have money to patch them or we haven't thought about it or we want to move around in the environment differently? No, we have to find ways to patch vulnerabilities. We have to look at disaster recovery. 3 years ago, I could not get a single company to write pandemics into their business continuity disaster recovery plan in the United States. The phrase I heard over and over is, this is the United States. We don't have pandemics. Skip that part of the plan. Now we know that is not true. And now people ask for that to be in their plan. Pandemics are disasters. Pandemics are important, disasters are important, and they lead to business continuity or the lack thereof. The difference being business continuity is everything you want stays continually up and running, and disaster recovery says I can be without something for a period of time. Defining that for your business, your nonprofit is so very important. Can you be without email for 4 hours, 8 hours? Can you be without your telephone service, your cell phones, an application, your donor database? Can you be without your constituents being able to get to you? Whatever it is, what is the defined time? And then, of course, backups that Mike will probably want to talk about. A lot of people think that backups don't have to take place anymore because we write everything to the cloud. We copy everything to the cloud. Just let one piece of ransomware get in your environment and you'll still understand how important backups are. Wouldn't you agree with that, Mike?
Absolutely. And so an exercise that I do with all of my clients is as we're looking at disaster recovery and backups, and with majority of our clients on the cloud, we go through scenarios of what ifs, what ifs, what ifs, and then we start to build contingency plans based on those what ifs. You know, I have customers that use a service called Okta. It's a single sign-on platform, but it's the keys to the kingdom for some of our customers and their SaaS applications that they've chosen to tie in with Okta for security purposes. And we always go through, okay, what if Okta has an extended outage? How is that going to impact the organization? Because sometimes you can't go to customers and say, well, Okta's down. Well, Microsoft's down, so, we're all just going to kind of go home. No, everybody still needs to keep running their organizations, delivering services to their customers and to their users. And you have to set thresholds. Okay, if a major system has an outage and it's going to take email, we can handle email outage for 4 hours, for 8 hours, for 12 hours. But really important is looking at those break glass scenarios. Because if you are in the middle of an outage and you're going to try to break glass and see what it's going to take to uncouple so that you can get to, you know, your email or get to an application or get to a database, doing it real time is always a really bad idea in IT. It could actually put you in a worse situation than just riding the outage out. But by going through those exercises and then going through the scenarios and then documenting what the break glass scenarios are is the really, you know, the rigor that disaster recovery and backup as well, because they're really hand in hand. What if we get a ransomware on our Google Drive and every file gets gets crypto locked? Well, at one time we say, oh well, we'll just revert to an older version. Well, I've seen ransomwares that don't just lock the files, they rename all the files to gibberish. So now you don't even know what you're restoring. And so, you know, looking at another solution of like, oh, we have our, you know, we have our databases, you know, our SaaS applications backed up. For those of, for those of you, those who use Salesforce, if you read in their fine print, they do, you know, they do back up their systems, but it says in the fine print, you should be responsible for backing up your own data. And those are really, as you go through those disaster recovery processes and looking at scenarios, this is when you find the fine print, right, Sarah? You know,
Absolutely.
as because not everybody knows that fine print exists. But when you call it out and say, well, what happens if this happens? And then somebody goes, well, I don't know. I don't know is a perfectly, you know, acceptable answer on the first time. But then going back through and say, oh, well, I found this out, this out, and this out. And now we should come up with a plan of recovering from an outage.
Absolutely. So when you couple together disaster recovery, backups, and a larger subject, business continuity, you also step right into this piece of the life cycle on incident response, because there's something you're going to have to do during this disaster. There's something you're going to have to do to recover backups. And there's something you're going to have to do to test your own business continuity plan, the response to which will require human beings to do something. So you want to be able to test your own incident response to all of those scenarios as well. So I
And
jumped
then,
ahead a couple of things, but I think this incident response is also an important coupled item.
and Sarah, and that leads into, you know, all these things are connected. And then we start looking at data classification and impact, right? You know, as you're going through your disaster recovery, you're identifying key systems, email communication, maybe a phone system communication. You know, access to SurveyMonkey might not be on the top priority, and you don't need to worry about an extended outage. But what it really is, you know, in technology is driving your organization. What are the key, you know, applications in it? What level, you know, those plans need to be vetted out so that you know, business continues even when there's a technical problem or a technical outage.
Right. So I wanted to just let you know this is the life cycle. This is not in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 order and start over. This is all continuous. When Mike talks about classifying, it goes all the way back to the assets to discover what's confidential, what's sensitive, what's public, that type of thing. We're here to support you in helping you classify. A couple of mistakes that organizations make is not to classify. Therefore, their things are either one or two ways. Everything is unclassified and could be potentially misconstrued as public, or everything is confidential and is misconstrued as everything is a priority. Of course, I would like to lean more this way, but it also has its problem statements to overclassify as well as underclassify. So we can help you support you in getting the classification of the assets together. It's always going to be an iterative process. Every time you do a DR or BCP or an incident response test, you're going to find something that's misclassified or something that you want to change the classification on to either be more or less secure, depending on the item. Now, this leads straight into compliance and privacy. So you're not necessarily a publicly traded company, but some of you might be subscribing to Sarbanes-Oxley for nonprofits. This is a compliance framework that is adoptable. It is something that is also up to you whether you use it or not, because it doesn't have any legal requirement for you, but it does nicely cover what is audited by the California Business Office if you happen to be a California corporation. So there is compliance involved. There is also privacy compliance involved in what every one of us should be looking at. There is privacy data, whether that's PII or whether that is health data like HIPAA data or child protected data like COPA data. Whatever it is that we have, there's privacy involved, and there are laws, depending on your state, that control the privacy of the data. And then there is your own subjective privacy rules you want to put in place on top of that. So this all plays a part of it. I did skip network security. It is at the very basic level of security and is super important for those of us who maybe you have your office in a Regis location or a WeWork location or a shared location or your home location, and people come in and sit on your home network. It is important to work on the security of whatever network you're sitting on and to silo what is important by that classification of assets away from everything else. You should never have your guest network and your work network together, especially where there could be privacy data, compliance data, or important classified data. Is there something else you'd like to say about that, Mike? I know you deal with the network security a lot.
Yeah, so what I would say in my experience in nonprofits is that, there's a lot of our nonprofits either have a large population of volunteers, a large population of non-computer but computer people, where there's a bank of 5 or 10 computers sitting sitting in a room, and they're shared environments. And really where compliance and privacy and asset and infrastructure start to merge is, is your HIPAA data, is your PII data that might be sitting up on a cloud, maybe in Google Drive, maybe in OneDrive, maybe in Dropbox or Box. Do you have it secured? Do you have it wrapped around so you can't download that to a non-secure machine because you have a handful of what we call kiosk machines that any employee can come in, log in and use? Well, what I'm really getting at is suddenly if that data can be downloaded to a machine, now that machine falls under the compliance, and you can build your network looking at your data and understanding how people are accessing that data, so that you don't have to have a massive amount of rigor around all of your assets.
If you look at the bottom of this slide where it's manage your IT and your vendors, monitor, log, have BCPDR plans, backup, incident response, you scan, you patch, you remediate, you onboard and offboard, and you train people properly. Those are the basics of IT that have to be in place to have your business running. Whether it's running well or not, or how deep you go, is up to you. There'll always be recommendations that Mike and I can make. But then if you take all of your assets, and that being everything that you, whether it's data or machines or technology that's in that gray box at the bottom, and you say, I need policies and standards for all of this. I don't want to, my people or my business going outside of these guardrails. Here's my policy. Thou shalt do this. Here's my standard. Here is how I want it done. And the next level is the procedure or the configuration. Here is the very specific way I want it done, or it needs to be done. And it needs to be configured this way every single time, unless there's a real exception that we can all bite off on. And then looking at your privacy, physical, and asset protection. All of those things need to be in place to support your business. All the privacy rules, all the physical security you want, and all the assets, including the cloud, being protected. And then the last little piece that gets left off quite a bit is reviewing. And there are reviews that can be done manual, as Mike spoke of. There are tools that can do reviews. There, on the other side of this wall is a security operations center that 24/7 by 365 sits and stares into your network to make sure everything that you want to happen is happening, and that things are not happening that you didn't sign up for, no one's hacking into your systems, etc. And if they are, what are the rules to make it stop? So there are manual things, and then there are processes and tools and applications you can use. All of this is a program. So when we talk about IT or we talk about security, it's not just one or two things, and it's not just about antivirus and malware on your laptop anymore. It's all of the program. Mike, did you want to jump in and say something about this?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, when it comes to the review is really where the rubber meets the road. IT can have its processes and procedures, and here's a good example. Through automation of a lot of our clients, we have an automatic setup of Windows machines. It's called Microsoft Autopilot. Great technology if you aren't utilizing it, and it gives the ability to buy a machine, set up some parameters, and drop ship a machine to an end user for them to do a self-installation. And really, when I mean self-installation, I mean put in your new company username and password, and everything automates installation of software, setting up the system, encrypting the hard drive, going through all of the security processes that IT has set up. But here's the thing: the review that we put in place on a post-employee setup is if those employees start on a Monday, our service desk will review on Friday to make sure everything was done properly. Because sometimes technology just doesn't quite work the way they tell you it's going to work. Sometimes it'll work properly on one machine, but not on another. And without those reviews, the things that you worked really hard in automating and putting processes to do, can still fall through the holes. And that review process is the final check. Like, yes, we do it, here's the policy, we do it this way, it's being done this way, and it did complete the way it was supposed to. And I see a lot of IT departments miss that last step. Oh no, we have that automated. That software automatically gets pushed. And you don't want to be in a situation, security, you don't want to be in that situation where you're like, oh, we'll just rely on the end users to submit tickets when something's not working. Well, that's where security holes start to fall in, right, Sarah?
Absolutely, absolutely. Without the review process of some sort, you may have holes in your environment, and you may not know about them whatsoever. So, all right, perfect. Next slide, please. So this is just a generic timeline of how Mike and I go about looking at building the IT security program for you. And it's totally based on the size of your organization and the complexity of your organization. So when we do a discovery to help you plan for transformation, the reason I say to 3 to 6 weeks is your organization could be super small and not complex, or your organization could be super large and more complex, or somewhere in between. But there is a discovery component and a planning component. Then we move into a period of time where we document, maybe we're writing run books, maybe we're implementing, supporting, assessing, transforming, finding the things we can't transform with technology, and having manual processes. This part of a timeline to build a program takes, again, 12 to 24 weeks. I know that's a pretty large span, but again, it depends on the size and complexity of your organization. And then finally, you don't want to just not validate that you are doing the thing that you just documented and thought you wanted to do. You want to test, you want to assess at the very end. This is why when you go to get your driver's license, when you're 15 or 16, me, it was 15. I know some of you on this call have made it different. I was 15. They hand you a book. You are not a licensed driver. You are not doing the thing because they hand you a driver's license manual. You're doing, that's your plan. That's what you're supposed to be up to. That's your document. Then you have to practice. You have to get into the phase 2 and you have to practice the driving, understand the mechanisms of how the car is going to react and how you're going to react to the car. And there is always a final test with that guy at the driver's license bureau or the DMV that's going to validate if you're doing it to plan. So that's kind of my non-technical way of saying that this is how we would go through a plan in maybe it looks like a year for you. Mike and I just made a plan with another organization that would be over 2 years because they just don't have the resources, the time, or the money to compress it into a year's time. So it's going to be a 2-year plan. It might be a 3-year plan. I have one customer that just finished a 4-year plan. But wherever you are, if you can make progress, it's great. What do you think, Mike?
And what I love when Sarah goes through this process is as we start into phase 1 with customers and we'll ask them, can you give us an entire asset, list of all of your IT assets? And, kind of the deer in the headlight, no, that's going to take absolute months to do. Well, yes, that it will take months to do. But that's what we're here to help in phase 2. And Sarah, every time we've done this, right? Yes, it has taken months the first time, right? But then once you go through the procedure and the process to actually generate that, the asset, IT asset list, now it'll only take you a day.
That's right.
And same thing with like an, identity audit. Oh my gosh, you want us to do what? You want us to go and look at every single user on every single SaaS product that we have in our whole organization? Like, yeah, we do want you to do that because you should be doing that. And it gets overwhelming. And they're like, no, that's going to take weeks and months to do. Yes, it takes weeks and months to do it the first time. But once we're through that, it only takes a few hours, maybe a day, and then the rigor of the process of repeating it starts to come easier and easier. And one of the favorite thing that I love through this phase 2 when we do this, we're constantly identifying efficiencies that we can do in this process, and efficiencies with our experience of doing it on so many different platforms, Sarah, that the end users and the customers they're like, oh, hey, I didn't think about doing it that way. And then of course, then automation starts to come in and the talk of automation and, oh, hey, we can, have an asset inventory platform that we can do this. And they're like, well, we don't have what do they always say, Sarah, at the beginning of the project? Oh, we can't budget for that. We can't budget for that. Well, then we bring them through the process and they go, wow, there's a lot of value add to being able to budget for that. So we're going to put that into, our 2023 budget, because we can really automate this and do this quickly without having to throw a lot of people time at it.
Absolutely. And it's really our job to help you be as efficient as possible and to maybe support or replace a missing resource during this process, or identify a missing resource for the future. So it's our job to help you out with that. All right, so we've come to the end of our time. I just want to leave you with one thing or two thoughts. This is our thought leadership based on if you go to our BPM website, you'll see a little bit more about today's topics in our thought leadership place. It's very important to ask us questions. If something is striking a chord with you, please feel free to reach out and ask questions. Mike and I are always available. And then the last thing I do want to remind people, you might not think all this matters to your organization, but if you were part of reading the story on Lincoln College last week, Lincoln College has been in business for well over 100 years. And because of security and IT resources and not being able to manage cyber attacks and ransomware, they are closing their doors this Saturday for good. They can't manage it. They don't have the resources, they don't have the talent, they don't have the time, and it's been just way too burdensome over the last 2+ years. So we want to support you. We don't want that to be you.